Publitarian and a Republican. Welcome to Publitarian Podcast.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. This is Ronald Johnson, Publitarian, coming at you again with another episode of Publitarian Podcast, and we are up to episode number 101, I do believe. And apologies in advance for the audio quality. I'm having to do a mobile version of the podcast because I haven't found a good time to get into the studio, and if that continues to linger, then the podcast episodes, get further and further apart. So I thought I would just go ahead and do it. So I'm about a week and a half late of doing my tribute to the late, great Rush Limbaugh. And I had this whole tribute episode prepared, but I just haven't been able to get into the studio. So rather than let it linger, I thought I would just go ahead and do it. Obviously, me doing a podcast, and I would say 99.99% of right-leaning podcasters do what they do because of some kind of influence from Rush Limbaugh. For my younger listeners who may not know, Rush Limbaugh basically pioneered and started a conservative vocal opposition to mainstream legacy media. And I mean, that's me just boiling it down to the just bare necessities, but he started it in 1988 as a DJ in Sacramento, just a regular old radio DJ. And he started putting his little comments in between songs or in between news, and it started getting people's attention, and good attention, positive attention. And then flash forward to 2021, he's syndicated in 600 and some areas with 22 million listeners, and ended up selling books that, as a Christian, I hate to say this, or what he would say was outselling the Bible, even though he was also a man of faith, and just really put a conservative footprint, and showed people that what the news is telling you isn't necessarily the truth, and you can have an alternate opinion to what you see on legacy media and TV, because back then it was just, TV and radio. We didn't have social media. So it was weird for someone to have a conservative voice. And so because of that, he ended up growing the market and pioneering the movement for conservatism. And he ended up doing a TV show, and it was very successful then. And he what he did, which was extreme talent, on loan from God, as he would say, he would make what he did look easy, which I think is why a lot of us wanted to jump into podcasting, or we'd listen to him do his thing, and we were like, it's hard. Podcasting, and to do it professionally, which is funny because I'm doing this mobile today, but to do a professional podcast and be prepped and entertain and inform people is extremely challenging and difficult. It's not a walk in the park. And that was one of the things Rush Limbaugh always said. He was like, I do what I do, and I'm making it look easy, but it's not, and it's hard. And now that I have podcasted for a few years, I don't even have, a scintilla of the audience that he had, but I can say beyond the shadow of a doubt, yes, for sure. What he did was make that look easy, and it's not. But I love my audience. I love doing what I do. But I just wanted to give a good shout out and good tribute to him. I took his death really hard. I even cried. It's he had kind of a transition as kind of what I would call a Bush legacy Republican into kind of questioning the deep state, questioning the administrative state, and to watch him go through that, because he was always, wanting to be on the side of truth. To watch him go through that transition was pretty crazy, because like I went through that transition, some years before he did, because he was still kind of like towing the conservative, like the Mitt Romney line all the way up into like 2012. And then I think, 2014, 2015 was an eye-opener for a lot of conservatives, including him. And he was, like I said, he was always a pioneer ahead of the curve. And so I knew that if he continued to pursue truth, he would not stay on the side of like the Bushy type, blue blood establishment Republicans. And anyway, just a great man, a great broadcaster, a great podcaster, a great entertainer. And a lot of what I think and a lot of my political opinions were formed from listening to him. And I remember it was during, because I'm old, it was the 2000 election. It was when all this chaos was going on. And I think I've told this story on my podcast before. And the elections were being challenged. It was Bush versus Gore. I'm like, what is going on? I'm like, I don't believe what the news is saying. There's got to be another side to this. Just something seems off about this. And I'm like, who did my dad used to listen to back in the day? I started bebopping around on the radio. I can find him here somewhere. And then I recognized the voice. He had a very distinct, recognizable voice. And, yep, sure enough, it was Rush Limbaugh. And I started listening to him. And as kind of like a center-of-the-road person, when I started listening to him, I would be angry. I would shout at the radio. I'd be like, no, that's not how it is. That's not how the world works, Rush. This is, the way you're thinking is so backwards. It's so archaic. And then what Rush would be really good at would be to say, like, okay, ask yourself, why do you believe the things that you believe? He would do these kind of convincing arguments like, I'm not trying to sway you. I'm asking you, why do you believe this? And then he would lay out the facts for you. And sometimes the facts would make you angry, especially if you're like kind of even left-leaning. And then you would think about it and you'd go like, well, that is correct. And then he was a master at deconstructing the liberal news media, because that's where I really fought him hard, was the media. Because he would be like, oh, the media is so liberal. And I'm like, why would they lie, dude? It's their one job is to tell you the news. They have no interest in lying. If they're lying, they lose credibility. And then he would say, look for them to say this when the news happens. Look for them to use these words when the news happens. And he would predict what they were going to say on the news, and it would be 100% each time. He was like, when the story is this, they will say this instead to make it seem like, they'll blunt the instrument, And I started listening, and then I started learning like the media code. And then he also talked about the media, and he said, ask any journalist when they're going into journalism school what they want to do. And they will say, I want to change the world. I want to make a difference. And he was like, that's not a journalist's job. A journalist's job is to report the news. He was like, if you're going in journalism to make a difference and change the world, you're more than likely an activist. And then I started learning about Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals, and then I started learning about what they're really taught in journalism school, and the veil was lifted. And that was like a huge red pill for me. It was learning how the media operates and manipulates us into thinking and feeling certain ways. And I got to really credit him for that, because he really opened my eyes to that. And it's kind of like, I know the Matrix is cliche, but once you open your eyes to the tactics of the media, there's no going back. You can see it. It's just like code in front of your face. And he was a big influencer in my life for getting me to look past the media and go to alternate sources. I don't mean like going over to Fox News. I mean just looking at other media, looking and seeing what like other people report and how they report. Because the right can spin media too. Especially Fox. And, Fox carries water for the right, which again, my argument for that is, okay, so what? You've got 3 right-leaning cable news channels and every other one is liberal. Oh, boo-hoo. But even then, even with like right-wing kind of clickbait news, you can learn to see past that and get the facts. It's just hard to do that from left-wing news because they're coming from a point of dishonesty and subterfuge from the very beginning. And once you learn why they do what they do, because it's an ideology to them, it's a religion to them, they have to subvert you and get you over to leftism and smash down any kind of groupthink. Once you learn that tactic, and that's why they do what they do, because they're all ideologues. At worst, they're ideologue. At best, they're ideologues. At worst, they're just trained seals that know they're supposed to clap when somebody hands them a fish, and the fish is leftist ideology. But anyway, I'm rabbit trailing now. Anyway, I just wanted to give a shout out and a tribute to the late great Rush Limbaugh for doing what he did. And yeah, like I said, I took his death hard. It was a stage 4 advanced lung cancer. One of the bright spots of 2020 is that he got the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor that you can get. And God, watching that video clip, or even just hearing the audio of President Trump and Melania presenting the medal to him, it kind of just chokes me up every time, man. It's just like a lifetime achievement, 30 years of being in broadcast. And anyway, that's my shout out. That's my tribute to Rush. We're gonna miss you, man. It's just there'll never be another one. There will be duplicators and replicators, but there will never be another Rush Limbaugh. Let's see. I had other stuff I wanted to talk about besides that today. Let me just go through my notes. I know this is really professional, but I can't pause it when I record like this. Oh, speaking of podcasts, if you're into like a comedic take on the news and you're not easily offended, I would recommend Nick DiPaolo. Nick DiPaolo is a stand-up comedian from the 80s and 90s that started doing terrestrial radio and television hits. He's been in a bunch of movies, starred in guest spots. He was a writer on Chris Rock's show. Super offensive comedian, old Italian Boston guy, just says what he's thinking. But he has his own podcast, and I don't do a lot of shout outs except for Bongino, but Nick DiPaolo is another one to listen to. It's Nick, and it's DiPaolo, Nick DiPaolo. Like I said, if you're not easily offended, he does his takes on the news, and his podcast is hilarious. It's just he's so quick with his wit. The reason I brought him up is he said a line the other day that I wanted to remember to regurgitate on my own podcast. And he said, he was reading one of the news articles, and experts agree, experts say, and he was like, just replace the word experts with clowns, and then it will be accurate. And the whole rest of the podcast, whenever he was talking about experts, he was like, clowns. Clowns say, clowns studies have shown, and oh my gosh, I was rolling. Anyway, I'm pretty much just, I wanted to get the tribute to Rush, tell you about that great line that I heard from Nick DiPaolo, shamelessly plugging other people's podcasts, driving my audience away. Don't leave me. I love you. Stay with me. So I think that will do it on this edition of Publitarian Podcast. If you want to reach out to me, you can. I'm Publitarian at protonmail.com. I'm on all the social medias. Parler is back up. And I'm on Parler, I'm on Gab, I'm on Minds, I'm on Locals, even though I'm having a hard time figuring Locals out. You can tell Jordan Peterson had something to do with that. Was it Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin, or both of them? I can't remember. Anyway, you pick a social media, Publitarian, I'm on there. I'm even on Rap Chat, even though I haven't rapped yet. But maybe that's coming. Anyway, I think that will do it for me in this edition of Publitarian Podcast, and I will see you guys on the next one. listening to Publitarian Podcast, copyright 2020.